first off, everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I think you guys are probably my most favorite industry podcast out there because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
Hey everybody, Mike here for another episode of Creative Risk. I'm really excited to finally come out with this episode. Recorded this back in November while I was doing Anything Goes at Gulfshore Playhouse. And in this episode, I am interviewing the director of the show Anything Goes, as well as the producing artistic director of Gulfshore Playhouse and the CEO, Kristen Coury. So I'm really excited for this. Kristen is somebody, I say this in the podcast, who I really respect. She's one of the most entrepreneurial artists I know. What she has done at Gulfshore Playhouse over the past 20 or so years is incredible, growing this theater in Naples, Florida. And it was a huge milestone because this production of Anything Goes was the inaugural production in this $72 million state-of-the-art theater and education center that she built. That is now where Gulfshore Playhouse resides. So I'm just going to read Kristen's bio here. Kristen Coury is the CEO and producing artistic director of Gulfshore Playhouse. She founded the Playhouse in 2004 after moving to Naples from New York City. Under her leadership, the Playhouse has grown to a staff of 56, I think more, as she says in the podcast, and an annual budget of $8.15 million with no debt, and led the charge to create the $72 million state-of-the-art Baker Theater and Education Center at the gateway to downtown Naples, which opened to the public in late 2024. As part of this project, Coury ignited a public/private partnership with the city of Naples, donating an acre of land upon which to build the public parking garage. While in New York, she worked on Broadway for the Walt Disney Theatrical's production of Beauty and the Beast, both nationally and internationally, and for Andrew Lloyd Webber's company, The Really Useful Group, working on Sunset Boulevard and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. She made her feature film directorial debut with Friends and Family, starring Tony LoBianco and Anna Marie Alberghetti and Tova Felcha, which was released around the U.S. and Europe. She's directed several new works, produced a CD, and worked on a variety of musicals in various stages of development. Kristen is also a frequent investor in Broadway productions, most recently the Neil Diamond musical A Beautiful Noise. She's directed over 40 productions for the Playhouse, including a 10-person, 2-piano My Fair Lady, world premieres, the world premiere of The God Game by Susan Bradbeer, and The Butcher by Gwendoline Sulaiman. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Kristen was named one of the top 40 professionals under 40 by Gulfshore Life magazine in 2008, a star in the arts by the United Arts Council of Collier County in 2011, and she was named one of the Men and Women of the Year by Gulfshore Life in 2013. She served 2 terms on the board of the Theater Communications Group, the National Advocacy Group for Professional Theaters. She's a member of the board of the Greater Naples Chamber of Commerce. It was named one of the top 100 most influential business leaders in Collier County in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Most recently, she was appointed to the Florida Council for the Arts and Culture by Senate President Kathleen Pasadomo. So, just a very well-rounded artist. Very cool. I'm really excited for you guys to listen to this episode. We talk about a lot of really important things about the failures of regional theaters and why Gulfshore Playhouse has actually grown during this time, about her very eclectic journey to where she is now, the importance of mindset, manifestation, leadership, so many different things. Great conversation, so I'm excited for you guys to listen. Enjoy. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
How are you feeling?
Great.
Yeah. How was your weekend?
Filled with theater.
Really?
I came to see you guys and Anything
That's
Goes
right.
on Saturday
that's right. You
night,
were here.
and that was fabulous. Big high energy. And then the next day, I was watching our one-man show, Every Brilliant Thing.
Oh, I have to
with
see
Jeff
it.
Binder.
I don't know if maybe I really want to see it.
Yeah,
I
mean,
really
you
want-
certainly know that guy.
I certainly do, and his one-man shows. That's great. Well, I appreciate you being here. And we're going to do a bio at the top, so that'll be recorded separately and all that. But
Okay.
the first question I have is, how did you get into the business of show?
Well, I mean, I think you mean professionally, not
Yeah.
just like when was the bug that bit me, but
Maybe that too.
Well, I guess we'll get into the bug that bit. But
Yeah.
I would say that the way I got in was that I went home one afternoon when I was in college, and my mother said she had signed us up to be on a game show.
What game show was it?
$100,000 pyramid.
Oh,
And I was like, what? She, of course, chickened out, and I went out to Burbank and I auditioned because it turned out she hadn't signed us up. It turned out we had to audition to actually like, show that we had the personality to be on a game show, whatever, and that we were of somewhat intelligence. And so I got on, and then it was maybe that was even. It might have been that I was in high school when that happened, and so because then it got canceled. It was like Dick Clark. Do you remember? Like
yes. Well, I know New Year's Rockin' Eve.
Yeah, and so it got canceled because Dick Clark was getting old, and they took it off the air. And I was like, oh, bummer, because I'd qualified and I wanted to be on. And then like years later, now I was in college, and I get this letter like, we're bringing it back with God, I can't remember his name. John Davidson was the host. And so, if you want, come back out to California, we'll put you on. And so I was like, sure, okay, I'll do that. Am I close enough?
No, you're good. You're great. Okay. Don't worry.
So I said, sure, okay, I'll do that. So I went back out. I got on. I played for a week. I was like I qualified for the next round to go for 100,000. Yeah, I ended up winning like $30,000. This was great.
God, because I have to find this.
Amazing, right? Because I was like 21 or 22 and I was in college. So my dad, I was a junior in college. My dad took the money from me and said, I'm going to hold this until you graduate. And when I graduated, he gave it back to me with interest. And he said, now you can either go buy a car or you can do something that's going to really change your life. And I said, well, I'm going to go do something that changes my life. So I decided to move to London and intern or try to intern. That was the goal at somewhere, for a year, because I figured I had enough money to last a year.
What were you majoring in college?
Acting, directing.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep,
cool,
theater
cool.
with a concentration of acting, directing. So, and so I did. I went to London and I literally started knocking on doors. I tried to do the pre thing so that I could actually go with an internship, but I was getting all these wonderful letters from all these wonderful directors back going, darling, we'd love to have you, but of course we have no openings. Yeah. And so I went anyway, and I'm like literally knocking on doors. And I go to this place called the English Shakespeare Company, and I said I'd like to intern for them. And they were like, well, you're an American. Why on earth should we hire you? And I was like, well, because I'm free. And they were like, great idea. Come along, And so I worked for a year for the English Shakespeare Company in the press and marketing department. They put me in charge of a department. Wow. They gave me like my own little,
they put you in
my
charge
little
of the
purview.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was great. I learned so much. And then I would have stayed. I mean, I'd still be there today. I love England and I loved London, and I would have loved to have stayed, but they sent me home. So of course, then I went to New York and started working for Broadway producers. So.
Right. And so, what was your time in New York like? When you got back from London? Yeah,
my time in New York was fun because when I got there, it was the mid-90s
Sure.
when Beauty and the Beast had only just started on Broadway. So in other words, Disney was just starting to get its feet wet with figuring out how to produce Broadway. And they had no clue. It was so bizarre. Like the corporate structure was still very much in place. They were calling like, if you wanted to like fly a designer from Los Angeles to New York, you had to get 3 different signatures in finance at, in Burbank. And it was just like so complicated.
Bureaucratic, like bloat kind of thing. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. But we had 3 guys working for, who were like the bosses, and they were all real theater people. And so it was this clash of the titans, as it were. And, but it was great because the theater people were telling Disney how to do theater, and Disney was pushing back and telling them how to do Disney. But the product was great. I mean, Beauty and the Beast was great. And it was at the, and then I started working on the international productions, sending them all around because they started, obviously it was really popular in New York. Am I talking too fast?
No, you're great. Now, what was your position? So, what was your position?
I was international production coordinator. That's what my title was.
Fancy.
So, yeah.
That sounds
fancy. But I started out answering phones. Yeah. I called the office and I said, can you tell me who I would write to if I wanted to send in a resume? And the woman said, you have to call Dawn France. And I said, okay, how do you spell that last name? And she said Frantz. But my upstate New York accent hears Dawn France as Dawn. So I wrote to Ms. Dawn France. And of course, and this was like pre-internet days. You couldn't just look things up, right? You couldn't just Google them.
Some woman in Forest Hills or something.
And of course, Mr. Dawn France got back in touch with me. And I was like, oh, man.
Right.
But he gave me the job. So I started answering phones. And within a couple of months, they had moved me to this international production coordinator position. And it was great because we were sending productions to Japan and to Australia and to Venice and stuff like that. So that was really fun work. And eventually I went to work for Andrew Lloyd Webber, his company. and that was I was like an assistant general manager, assistant company manager. So I was working on Sunset Boulevard, on Broadway, which I saw posted just announced that they opened 30 years ago. I was like, oh God.
What's time? Who cares?
What's time? And then they put me on tour with Joseph and the Amazing Technical Dreamcoat. That was fun too. Great stuff that helped me learn, really. I mean, the foundation of what I do today.
Right. Like producing, so mainly like producing, management. And during this time, are you like experiencing that like itch to go like back to more of like art, like the quote, the other side of the table or whatever, like directing, acting, whatever it is. So 100%. That? Yeah.
100%. So I was like, oh my God, in some ways I feel like I could be selling lipstick for all that I'm behind the computer, I'm making theater, but like you show up at the opening night party and they're like, who the hell are you? You know what I mean? And you feel like you have a real investment in it, but I felt like I wanted to be close to the art. So I came back from being on tour with Joseph and the Amazing Technical Dreamcoat, and they were like, well, we filled your job at the office, so now this tour is closed, and so now we don't have a job for you anymore. And so at that moment, Cameron McIntosh's office called me, and they wanted me to go back on tour with Les Mis. But I can't tell you that being a company manager on tour is a very great job.
I hear terrible things. It's terrible.
It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's
really
all
tough.
The logistics of it. I mean, it's
I was on a bus and truck, so it was like every 2 days we were moving and then finding them a new bank, new place to do laundry, and I don't have a king bed. I want a clean, I want a king bed.
Exactly.
I need a queen bed. It was a lot. It was a lot. Anyway, it was also during that time, though, because we were always setting up offices inside the backstage of the theater somewhere. So it was during that time that I would like sneak around and I'd go stand in the back of the theater and I would watch and I'd be like, that person's out of step. And I'd go report it to stage manager and be like, that dancer was out of step. And so
trying to take back that control in some way. Exactly. Yeah.
That's
good. Yeah.
So that's what really that's what I felt like the directing bug bit for sure. I mean, obviously I had majored in it, so I liked it, but I felt like, I think what I thought in my 20s was a director needs to know every single thing, meaning like, what is that light? What's the name of that light? And how is it hung? And how does it work? And I know now, you don't need to know all that.
Sure.
You just need to know like what you want it to look like, and the actual lighting designer will figure it out. But back then I was like, I can't be a director because I don't know everything,
Interesting.
And so I stopped myself from doing that at first. And I started directing around, like trying to do assistant directing. Like I went out and worked on a show at Goodspeed. I was doing some workshops on Broadway, and I was doing some like university stuff that I was directing on my own.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine said, there's I should not name this musical.
Well, I could bleep it out.
I can't name the musical because then you'll know who the person is I'm talking about. But it was a musical that was going straight to Broadway. It wasn't going to go out of town. It wasn't going anywhere. And they were looking for PAs. And he was like, you have to work for free. And I was like, well, hell, I'll work for free, because I saved up some money on tour. And so I became a PA for this straight to Broadway musical. Great, incredible cast, great composers. I knew it was going to fail. For a couple of reasons, because the structure was all wrong, the subject matter was wrong, and my job was like to kind of be in charge of the understudies. I was like helping the understudies be the understudies.
Sure.
And one day I'm sitting in the they were doing not an understudy rehearsal, they were doing an actual scene. It was very close to opening. I was sitting in like the second row watching this director direct, and I felt like the actors were asking questions and he couldn't answer any of the questions.
Really?
And he didn't know I felt like he didn't know what he's talking about. And this is a guy who's won Tonys ad nauseum. And I said to myself, if he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah,
and that's what really gave me the guts to like go out and start doing all those little directing gigs. And so then I took a complete left, and I got a letter from a guy who said a friend of yours suggested I get in touch with you because I want to do a reading. He had won an award from the Brooklyn Film Institute for a film that he had written.
Right.
And he had won $5,000 as a result of winning this award, and he thought he wanted to do a reading with it. But it was like 48 people in this movie. So
wow.
I was like, yeah, sure, I can do a reading with 48 people. I think we had
a film. Yes.
Of a film. I think we had we did it at one of those Theater Row theaters on 42nd Street. And I think that we had 20 people in this reading, and, doubling and tripling. And there were, and it was a farce. The movie was a farce, like a real screwball comedy, almost like an it was modern day, but it was almost old fashioned in its sensibility. And so we had, there were drag queens, and there were mobsters, and there were gay people, and there were this and that. I mean, it was hilarious. And it was about two guys who were hitmen for the mafia. And their secret was not that they were gay. Their secret was that they were in the mafia. And so when
That's funny.
right,
Yeah, that's good.
Exactly. And
That's
this
good.
was like,
That's a good
late
little blog
90s.
line,
So
yeah.
this was before Will and Grace. And this was before people were, actually like accustomed to just going to see things with gay content. And so it was meant for like the grandma in the Midwest who could go see it and be like, and this happened. Like old ladies were like, the brothers are so cute. And I'm like, well, they're not brothers. So we did that reading, and it was craziness. And at that same time, I was starting to work on something which I felt like needed to be a screenplay. I've since decided it needs to be a play, but it's still not finished. And that's 25 years later or something. I was writing it, but I decided that if I was going to write this thing, which I thought needed to be a movie, that I needed to go to film school. So I went to the New York Film Academy and did this thing at New York Film Academy just to figure out how to put what I understood about directing into film. Sure. And a few weeks after that, the guy who had written that screenplay, calls me and he says, so we've decided to do it ourselves and self-fund it. And I was like, great, congratulations, good luck. I said, you should reach out to Miramax. They'll love stuff like that, good content, whatever. And he was like, and we'd like you to direct it. And that's what I did inside. My head was like, what? And I hear my mouth saying, okay, and I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to do that? And so, like my credo has always been, surround yourself with good people who know what they're doing, and you'll get through. So ended up directing this movie called Friends and Family, and we ended up doing the film festival circuit, and it ended up being
I never knew that.
distributed internationally, like subtitles and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, cool stuff.
That's amazing.
I mean, we didn't make $1, but
Sure,
I'm sure the people who distributed it ultimately probably made money. I hope,
Yeah.
but we didn't make any money, and that's okay. But it's an adorable, cute little movie. You can still find it around. I think it's maybe on Amazon or something. But yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah.
But I hated movie making.
What did you hate about it?
Hated everything about it.
Yeah.
The only thing I liked about it was the 29-day shoot. Yes. I loved being with real people, and that's why I've always been a theater person.
Yeah.
And I hated the business of it. Suddenly they were like, "Oh, you made this movie and it's good, so now you've got to have a manager, and you've got to have an agent, and you've got to move to LA, and and I was like, and Des McAnuff had just directed Rocky and Bullwinkle 2. And I was sort of like, I don't want to be the theater person that turns into a movie director and directs Rocky and Bullwinkle 3.
Exactly.
I don't want to do it. And so I feel like I really just pulled myself away from the from that. But it had taken me 2 or 3 years of my life to make this movie. It's a long process.
Of course, yeah.
You got to do so much prep work, and which shot and where, and scouting and doing all the figuring that out.
Post is a nightmare.
Post was a nightmare. I mean, it was a long edit, and then sound edit, and then colorization, and all the things, And so that's what I hated about it. I loved that live part, and then after that, and there's no rehearsal. It's just the antithesis. Everybody's like, it's a director's medium, you're gonna love it, and I was like, I hate this because you can't rehearse, you can't interact with the actors. You're just kind of telling them to do a thing, not to really be a thing.
Right.
You're
it's just you do it a bunch of times so I could just get that 10 seconds I need.
Just, clap your hands louder and then say it faster. It's like, that's not, that's not really acting to me,
I don't think
It was
so
fun.
either.
I learned a lot, and I feel like I use it today in the videos and promos that we make and stuff like that. But nothing, nothing that I ever want to do again. So by that point, it was like we had 9/11. And then I was like, I need to try to get back into the theater business after 3 years away. And I was just like, this sucks. And everybody was like, well, you just directed a film, so you're not going to be a good assistant director on Broadway because you'll try to take charge. And I was like, and I went back to Disney, and I had an audition for, I had an interview for, Lion King was looking for a new resident director. And I was like, it'd be great, I'll maintain the show, blah, blah, blah. And this woman was like, you would be terrible. And I said, what do you mean? She said, you would die a quick death if you had to direct someone else's show for the next 3 years. And I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right.
I don't know how people can do that. That is really challenging. People that have to maintain shows, where's the? I mean, really, that's just not to be rude, but that's like a job. That feels like a job to me.
Yeah.
Where's the creative spirit in it all?
Right, you might as well drive a truck for UPS or
do low key,
be a cashier at
low key,
Home Depot or
that's
something.
how I feel too.
So yeah, you know what I mean. So I was just like, oh yeah, you're right. So so that was when like all the nickels started to drop, that I needed to leave New York and I just needed to get out and figure out something else to do with my life.
Yeah.
And again, like it was such a sad place to be in New York after 9/11.
I'm sure, yeah, I can imagine.
So I was married to a French guy at the time. He was working in this beautiful French restaurant, and he'd worked through Thanksgiving and Christmas hard, pedal to the metal.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in January, they were like, here's, take a week off. And we didn't expect that he was going to have a vacation. We hadn't planned a vacation, and it was middle of winter. So I was like, where should we go? And so my mother had a house in Sarasota, Florida. And so I said, why don't we go down there and I'll show you, he was from Paris. He didn't know I'm from Florida. Yeah. So he was like, I'll show you Miami, whatever. We'll use Sarasota as our base and we'll drive around. So we were en route to Miami, and I'm looking at like remember these tour guide books, like books?
Yes, I do. I remember those. Yes, I do.
And I was like, oh, there's this Caribbean style island that's off the coast of Florida, like where you got to get off in Naples. Let's go to this Caribbean style island called Marco Island. Yeah. Biggest marketing lie ever. It is not a Caribbean style island.
It isn't. Yeah,
it definitely is not.
Yeah, it's good though.
But good for them. And so we got off at 107. Yeah. 105 didn't even exist, and exit 105 didn't even exist. And we got off at 107, and it was like, turn this way for the beach. So I was like, forget that Caribbean island. Let's go to the beach. Yeah. Went to the beach. I was like, this is beautiful. Ended up saying, let's stay overnight. We stayed overnight across the street from this theater at the Bayfront Inn on 5th.
Wow.
And the next morning we were sitting on the deck eating breakfast, and I looked next door. You'll see those colorful buildings across the street.
Yes.
And I said, look at those colorful buildings. Those are apartments. Let's go home. Let's sell the co-op and let's move there. And he went, like all Frenchmen do, okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we did. That's exactly what we did.
Wow.
We went home, sold the co-op, sold it in a day.
Wow.
And then moved here. And so while we were like deciding to move here and looking at houses and doing whatever, I went to a New York lawyer friend of mine who was also a Broadway producer. And I said, all right, here's the deal. I'm moving to New York. I'm moving to Naples. I don't have a name for the place. I don't have any money. And I know I know nobody, but I want to start a not-for-profit professional theater. Is it too soon to start? And he was like, no, it'll take you a year to get your 501c3. So, just, fill out the application. We'll help you through it. And, hit the ground running and go for it. And I was like, okay, sounds good. So we moved into Bayfront, and I started the 501c3, and I started calling people to sponsor. Like, we rented a night in the community theater, and we hired Carol Lawrence, who was the original Maria on Broadway, and like these 3 guys from Broadway, and we called it 3 Men and a Diva. And we had a one night only, and we sold the place out. And so my first board member, because like I said, I knew nobody, and I had to have 3 board members. Luckily, I had convinced my sister to also move to Naples. So my brother-in-law was number 2 and I was number 3. But my first board member was my realtor, because I didn't know anybody else in this town. And luckily he said yes. So
I just have to say, that's amazing that, so before you even like really know the town, you're just like, first off, you're setting the intention of setting roots down there. And was there a feeling of like you going too fast, to bring Carol Lawrence down, all this stuff? Like, what was was there any trepidation around like, maybe I need to walk before I run, or is that really, you were just like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go balls to the wall.
I'm not a walk before I run kind of person. And I said to somebody the other day, 20 years later, I'm so happy that I've created a company where everybody has put the cart before the horse. It makes me happy. It makes me happy because I feel so much like that's how things happen. But to give you the timeline, like I moved here in June.
Yeah.
And I like hit the, my realtor chairman brought me to his boss, the guy who ran the real estate company, John R. Wood Realtors. And I showed up with like 2 pieces of paper inside of a binder. I didn't have anything. I had a mission and I had this short and long-term goals page.
Right.
And the short-term goal was basically put on a plate. And the long-term goal was build a theater and education center with a 400-seat main stage and a 150-seat studio. And, rehearsal rooms and classrooms, like that was the dream from day one.
Yeah. Wow.
It took 20 years to get there, but here we are. So I told him that story, and he was like, well, you know what, Kristen, people are going to Sarasota and they're going to Naples and they're looking for houses, and a lot of them are choosing Sarasota, and it's not because it's more beautiful or cheaper. It's because of the arts. So here's a check for $5,000. Get going. And I was like, $5,000, you know what I mean? Like that was amazing. I opened a bank account. I started a website. I got business cards made, whatever. And so he hadn't signed up as a sponsor or anything. He just gave me his donation. But, me being industrious and enterprising, I sort of was like, hey, Phil, I'm going to, so that was like July.
Right.
And this Carol Lawrence thing was October. So, it wasn't like, I tried to do it in a week or something.
Yeah, sure.
I like worked up to it. So, got some sponsors on board, people who would, pick up Carol Lawrence in a limo and drive her, for free and whatever.
Yes.
So, call up Phil Wood, who gave me that $5,000, and I say, and I knew, his name was very respected, and I knew that would get attention. So I said, hey, Phil, do you mind if we call you a sponsor of the show? And he was like, no. What did he care, right? So I'm running his name in our ads, like John Arwood Realtors presents 3 Men and a Diva, Gulfshore Playhouse. You know what I mean? And so then it happened, and we had a sold out night. And I call him and I say, hey, Phil, you mind if I put in a congratulations ad to Gulfshore Playhouse from you? And he's like, no. So it's like John Arwood congratulates Gulfshore Playhouse on a sold out run. You know what I mean? I'm like, whatever I could do back then. Right?
Well, this is a big point because. One of the main questions I had, and it sounds in you're circling around this too, is how do you build trust within a community? Whether it's from a financial fundraising level, and also to get the community just to come see the theater and know it's good. And what's so fascinating about that is it's like this power of association. Like you get this respected member of the community to be associated, and it's all true. It's all he did. Technically sponsor the show, but it's like the storytelling of like people, I'm not an outsider coming in. It's like, no, it's like I am a part of this community immediately in some ways. And that sounds like was kind of around the lines of what you were doing.
Well, trying to do. I mean, we definitely had, the thing was that community theater on Fifth Avenue was built in the 90s when Fifth Avenue was failing. And like all theaters do, it brought a lot of life down to the downtown. And so there was a lot of feeling among the city fathers of like, this is the thing that saved downtown and don't screw with it. Like, don't get in its way. Don't compete with it. Don't anything. Like, and literally there was a letter from the mayor in the filing cabinet of the Norris Center, where we did end up making our home for 18 years, that said, don't let anything in this building that will compete with Naples players. And so this was like a big feeling. And so there was a lot of like, who do you think you are? Are you young upstart from New York coming to try to teach us how to do theater and stuff like that? And so that was something we had to fight against for sure. So you're right, building trust. And I also think that the answer to your question about building trust is, how do you build trust? We have a company core value, which we call integrity. And it's not about being a good person or a bad person. It's about structural integrity. It's really about the wheel. And the bicycle wheel has a bunch of spokes. And if one spoke is broken or bent, the wheel isn't going to do what it's meant to do. And so for us, we call that integrity, meaning you do what you say you're going to do in the time you're going to do it. Or you're in communication about it, or you like send you a text and say, "Hey, Mike, I'm 15 minutes late, and I'm at an audition. I'll be down." You know what I mean? So you're not sitting here going, "What the hell is Kristen?" And so I do feel like that was the only way that I could do that. Were two ways: was to do what I said I was going to do, and also to eventually, once we did finally get into the Norris Center after a couple years, and we did start producing, which was the key to integrity in my book, because we had these one night shows. We did Carol Lawrence. We had a thing with Carol Channing. We had a night with Anna Maria Alberghetti, because I was just trying to get Broadway names that this demographic would know and say, this is the type of people we're going to surround ourselves with. But still, at a certain point, we needed to produce a play or produce a musical, because we needed to show people that we could do what we said we were going to do. So eventually I did do that, did what I said I was going to do, started producing plays. And once we started doing that, I was in the lobby every single night for 18 years. In the pandemic, obviously that broke my habit. And so now I'm in the lobby like half the time. But every single night I was there, I was greeting people. I was hugging people. I was giving them kisses on the cheek, whatever, being like, welcome to this house. Come back. We want you to come back, and just getting to know them and getting to understand what they liked and getting to understand what they wanted to buy tickets to and stuff like that. If they hated it, they felt comfortable telling me. If they loved it, they felt comfortable telling me.
That's so good. Well, it's so interesting because this idea of integrity being like, because so many people don't do what they say they're going to do, especially in our business. There's a lot of flakes, and also, unfortunately, right? And so it's like, being able to show up and also value your audience, and the fact that you are having these very active conversations with them. Even like when you see independently produced theater in New York or whatever, there's still like this sort of aloofness a lot of the time. You feel like in a lack of accessibility, and between like creatives or artistic leadership, and unless it's a subscriber base or unless it's like a major donor, which those people need to be treated well as well, obviously. But that's so interesting to hear, like, the integrity first off of, like, we're professionals. So, like, that's what's going to sort of separate us from the other theater potentially that's here. Not that that's not valuable, but it's like, no, this is a professional theater. And also, interacting with the community, like asking the community questions, understanding what they liked, what they didn't, introducing yourself. It's a logical sense, but it's something so many people, it's hard to find the energy to do that too when you're in the midst of producing and directing and doing all the things you do, to take that extra time to make people feel valued. And it sounds like, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, people need to see you do that over and over and over again. It's fascinating. Yeah,
I believe that. And when people would say, you need to meet so-and-so and tell them about your theater idea, because, really they felt like it was an idea for a long time, even though we were producing pretty much the whole time. A lot of them were like, oh, she has an idea. I would say yes. And I would go have that meeting. And that's the other thing. I feel like never say no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just go to meet the next person, read the next play, do whatever you got to do.
Right.
I was going to say something when you were talking about flakes and people doing what they said they were going to do. I lost it. I'll get back to it.
Yeah. My next question is, what's nice is you've just answered a lot of these. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced producing, in addition to sort of like gaining the trust, just producing theater in general here? And of course, like, we're going to eventually talk about the education. So, building this building, which was, a monumental task. But over those 18 years, what were some of the biggest challenges you would face as a theater producer?
So many.
Yes.
So many that I have a board member who's helped me write a white paper on resiliency, because we have had so many. And not the obvious ones, right? The obvious ones were things like, we had a stage that was half of the wing space we have now,
right.
20 by 20 feet, no fly space, no wing space, no
right.
dressing rooms, nothing. We had no infrastructure.
Yeah.
And we were trying to do plays sometimes as big as 12 people with music. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes musicals, 12 people. And so it was such a challenge. So that mostly we were doing very small, talky, controversial,
yes.
thought-provoking type of fare, and that only attracts a certain kind of people.
Exactly.
They said when I first got here, don't do anything risque and don't do anything with swear words. So I was like, okay, I think I'll start with David Mamet, and
right.
So, because I was, at that, in those days, in the early days, there really was nothing to lose, really, truly nothing to lose,
Yeah.
And then as we got bigger, and once we started to really socialize the idea of building a building, then I started to it was more risk, and
right.
so we started to go a little bit more mainstream. Oh, that's what I was going to say before, was that working in commercial theater and working in not-for-profit theater, I've learned, like, regional theater and commercial theater are very much the same, right? We're wanting to do something that will please an audience. We're wanting to sell tickets, and
right.
we're wanting to, keep going. But the big, big, big difference is that a commercial producer does not know his or her audience at all. And I know
interesting
everybody. Like, I don't know if you could hear me in yesterday's speech, right? Yeah. I was like in the middle of the speech, and all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, hello, you're here! I'm so happy to see you. Welcome back!" Because I knew they had missed opening. I heard that he was actually in failing health, and so I was so happy to see him sitting there that I literally stopped myself in the middle of the speech to say hello. And that's the big difference, right?
Well, isn't that? And I do want. This is a big question I have about, like, as so many theaters are failing right now, and I would argue there's a lot of reasons for that, the pandemic to blame, but I also believe that institutions need to take responsibility too.
I 100% agree with you.
That's, I think, is, you can't just play the victim game. It's like there's probably a lot of bureaucratic bloat, too much, too quickly, and you guys have grown. It's taken time, but you guys have grown. But you guys have been able to maintain and grow during this time where so many theaters are failing. And you have done plays that are, the first thing that I did here was definitely sort of a weird thing. And so it's like, how do you balance that sort of as people are losing subscribers because they're trying to push subscribers, and sort of like, if there's one thing I think the arts can take, we just recorded a whole podcast today about this from this sort of election, is that people don't like to be educated from on high, and that's a mistake that I feel like a lot of nonprofits have made, is like, as opposed to purely like being part of the community response. It's like, no, it's our responsibility to teach you things and culturally enrich your life because you're ignorant or whatever. How do you balance, though, doing work, which I do know, you know that you're interested in challenging work and you have done challenging work. How do you balance that sort of dance between basically giving the audience what they want and also doing what you want to do, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So we have a board member who used to run the Folger Shakespeare and the Folger Theater, where I think you've maybe been. No, it was a different version of St. Joan that I saw there. Yes. It was before you. So she used to run the Folger. So she said there's something that you should know about being an artistic director, and that there's a very delicate balance between leading and being led. And I think that's really important, because we do want to find the balance between what will be commercially successful and then also like pushing the envelope. And I feel like we always did, even in the other space, we had 6 shows. We had grown from a 0 shows to a 6-show season. Right. And within those 6 shows, if you came to any one show, you wouldn't really know the totality of us, because if you came to the February farce, you'd think we were one kind of show. But if you came to the January new work or hard-hitting work or whatever, you'd be like, oh, you'd think they were one thing. And then, maybe a classic in April would be like, no, you'd think we were something else. And so I felt like, as the only professional theater in the county, we had a responsibility to do a variety of genres. So that was one of the ways that I tackled that. I will say that LORT, and so I don't know if your viewers would know what LORT is, but LORT stands for League of Resident Theater. The League of Resident Theater is the highest echelon of contract with equity, and now we are one, and that's good. LORT just did a study, which is kind of funny to me, because they had to spend money on this study to find out that why people aren't coming to the theater. That's what they were surveying.
Yeah.
They learned, shocker of shockers, that people that weren't coming to the theater as much anymore because they didn't think they were going to like what they were going to see, and they didn't want to come see it.
Period. Right.
Right.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so it's like, yep, that took a whole survey to figure out. I mean, like any good artistic director should know that, right?
Yes, exactly.
But what's happening is we are in the world of being preached on from on high, or being poked in the eye and told we're terrible people, and that this is now, many people think that's theater's function. I don't, right?
Right.
Theater started to, didactic, to teach and to please. And that, I feel, is still actually the goal. And so now our job is even easier, because we can do this huge, big, beautiful, splashy, filled with joy from top to bottom musical. And then we can do next door, Every Brilliant Thing, which is a lot more touching and heartfelt and a little more tough of content. It's about a kid whose mom tried to commit suicide when he was 7, and yet also it is hilarious at times and touching and all the things. And so it's so exciting to me now to be able to serve two demographics at the same time.
Well, it sounds like I think you just, that's a great point. It's like partially how you counteract this is, diversity of sort of programming, right? And making sure that you are also doing things that people are going to just enjoy and want to come to, so that they, again, trust you, right? And they trust that you do care about them, and you're not just like trying to put out propaganda or whatever the heck, whatever you want to call it, out there to sort of change their whole worldviews all the time. Not that there's not a place for that, at times, but you also know their needs and what they want. And so I think that's a really valuable point, is sounds like this spanning sort of genres and diversity of programming is really a part of that. That's really interesting.
And I feel like I have no interest in doing Poke You in the Eye Theater. I just don't want to do it. I'm not interested in that. My three goals were always, number 1, is it good?
Yeah.
Is it good?
Yeah.
If it's not good, it doesn't matter how well done it is or how well executed it is, people will not like it. Like, it won't. And my second thing was always, is it a full meal? Is it a full meal?
Yeah.
Or is it just an appetizer? Because if you go away and you're kind of like, or sitting there and thinking about your laundry list, or, the task you never got done today, and thinking you're wasting your time because you could be doing that task instead, that's not the goal.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So the goal is just, you want to, it's a kind of escapism, right? There's always just this feeling of like, if you've lost yourself at the theater, that's the goal.
I completely agree with you.
You just want to be, in the world.
And it doesn't have to be a I think that a good splashy musical will do that greatly, but also like challenging work can do that, but it has to be something that makes people
Yes.
want to lean forward.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a big problem in, New York and I'm talking to people more, and it's sort of an unspoken thing happening in the city right now. It's like people are kind of feel like we're losing our way in the sense of like this kind of work, and the audiences are getting smaller and more sort of one type of person, and it's become an iterative process because you can't think laterally or entrepreneurially. It's like, no, this is how we do it. This is what the point of it is. We're afraid that we're gonna come off a bad way if we don't do this kind of stuff, and it's like taking it back to basics, I also feel like is super important, obviously, and so that's really good to hear.
Yeah, and what I'm worried about, I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah,
what
please.
I'm worried about is that there is I believe that collective consciousness actually matters. There is a wave, I think, that is in the vein of like theater's failing. All theaters everywhere are failing. We're failing, and it's the audience's fault. They don't want to come see
100%.
what 100% we prescribe for them, that we know is good for them, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, so therefore, what happens is I am like the odd man out, for lack of a better phrase. We've talked to the New York Times twice. They're not interested in doing an expose on us. They're not interested in talking about a theater that's doing well, that's just been built and is beautiful and is actually attracting audiences and having sellouts, especially with like a 90-year-old play.
That's fascinating.
They're not interested in that.
That's fascinating.
American Theater Magazine, I used to be on the board of TCG. Like, they never heard of us. We haven't had even like an article that big in American Theater Magazine. You know what I mean? So it's just crazy to me. And I'm sort of like, yeah, because right now the national story is theater is failing, and it's true. There are a lot of theaters failing. So wouldn't you want to actually do a little focus on the one that might not be right now, and give people inspiration and hope, and say, this is still possible? Like, just maybe.
No, because then there's personal responsibility involved in that.
That's right.
And that's not, that's not something that's attractive to people. It's much easier almost to believe a narrative of, excuse me, the audiences are failing us, or it's not our fault, we're doing the best we can, as opposed to saying, what value are we actually providing? Maybe we're not providing enough value to our communities. Maybe we're not doing quality work. I think it's a phenomenal point. And that is so fascinating that they wouldn't want to highlight what you guys are doing. It's wild to me because it doesn't fit into a larger narrative of what you're talking about. It's much easier to go throw up your hands and go, well, would you say like what, through all these challenges, because I can tell, you're somebody who I think has, a spiritual journey. I don't know what that is exactly, but, and also you are somebody who is, what's the word I'm looking for? You have a very growth mindset. I feel like you do, you're somebody who's into developing, yourself and your spiritual life and also other things. What place does that serve for you in the face of all these challenges, whether it's growing the theater, State of the World? How does this all, how does it serve you?
So, spiritual journey.
Yeah.
I 100% believe, truly. Well, first of all, if you really want to talk, I believe I work for the gods of theater. So very often I'm like, okay, what would the gods of theater want? Or dear gods of theater, please make this work. Second of all, I 100% believe that in the way the universe works, that is a mystery to all of us. I don't know. That there was like a clarion call that went out, that some powers that be wanted a regional theater in Naples, Florida. I believe that because how I ended up in Naples by accident, how I ended up like, here's an idea, and how it happened is miraculous. Like, literally, I'm like, I worked my butt off, but you and hundreds of people over the years have worked their butt off, and hundreds of people have donated to make this possible, but still, like, it's still a miracle. You know what I mean? It's like nothing short of a miracle. So I'm like, and every step of the way, to go back to the challenges, and we'll talk about those, there were so many, 2 major hurricanes, a pandemic, and and also just all the space and stuff that I was talking about, the lack of space and the lack of ability to like make ends meet because our space was so small and we could only do small things that weren't giant attractors, all of the things. Through all the moments where I was like down, like I'm down and out, like you can't, if this doesn't work out by tomorrow, I'm done, I'm out, and I knew for so many years, like, thank God now that's no longer true, but for 19 of 20 years, like if I'd quit, the company would have gone under and it would have been done. Now we finally have grown into an institution that will be here and will last and will outlast me, and that's super exciting, right? And I want to say that I used to stand on the balcony over there in my apartment and look across the street at the empty land and imagine a theater growing up out of the land. So that's part of my spiritual journey, because I truly believe that the way the universe works, like if we close our eyes and imagine it and meditate on it.
Visualize and manifest it.
And manifest it, that it can come to pass.
Right. And
so I really do believe, and I've said this myriad times, like there was an angel on our shoulder all the way. Like I know it because it just, I feel like I'm the steward of it. You know what I mean? And it's
100%.
my job to like do the hard work and just keep the doors open and the lights on, but like there's something else guiding this place, because even like the last hurricane you saw, we just like, we weathered it like a champ. We didn't even lose power, and it knew that we needed to get this show on stage and we needed to open, and
right. Well, what's interesting about that too is, and you always hear, I think the hardest workers, it's funny that, like I would say, why does Tom Brady thank God after, a football game or whatever? And it's like, whatever your version of God is, it's because like there's a humility even with hard workers that that there has to be some grace that enters into the equation.
100%.
And, the other thing that's really valuable about what I think you're saying too is that if you believe that success is, that there is something, a larger force on your side, and you manifest that and you put out that energy, then when you struggle, when things happen, you're able to actually go into solution mindset, which is why I think one thing that I really value, there's a lot of issues with late stage capitalism, whatever. One of the things I always value about, the foundation and fundamentals of capitalism is, to an extent, is like you have to provide a value that people want to buy what you're selling, and that's on you. That's on nobody else. And so like, if you believe you're going to be successful, and you believe that all it takes is you just adapting and thinking laterally and whatever, you will be successful. You're able to actually take personal responsibility, as opposed to feeling like, what the New York Times or American Theater Magazine puts out, which is like, it's over and there's nothing we can do because we're stuck. Whereas there's so much personal responsibility we can take in this moment. And I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
So as far as growth mindset, I want to talk about that
Please.
for 1 second. Like I said, I'm the cart before the horse girl. But how that works in business practice is there's this thing called the Merlin principle. And it's the idea that you go to the end and you see where you want to get to and you work backwards. Right. And so, I think that the typical business school mantra would be something like, you've got your budget. You were successful this year at that budget. You add like 1% to 2%, maybe 5% if you're really ambitious. And then you sort of rinse and repeat. But I was like, I knew I wanted to get from here to there, and there was far away. So I kept thinking like, well, what do I need to achieve next year to get to there, wherever there was, whenever it was going to be? And I would sometimes, so it turned out that over the years, since at least 2012, because in the early years, the numbers were so small, it was like huge growth, but that was just because we were doubling, double $50, like
exactly, yes.
But from 2012 till today, so 12 years, we have had an annualized growth rate of 23% a year.
Oh my God.
23%.
My God.
So, and that's, I don't know. I haven't done the full research, but I don't think that's been paralleled in typical regional theaters. So
typical businesses.
Well, that's true too. So, and one of the ways that was done was that I would, in the early days, I was doing the budget, me, myself, and I, so I would look at it and I would say, okay, well, what do we need next year? If I was going to add 2%, I would have gotten nowhere. Nowhere. You couldn't even afford to hire an extra person if you had 2%. So I would say, well, where do we need to get by next year? And we need to hire these people. We want to add this programming. We want to start the New Works Festival. We want to do whatever, right? And all that's going to cost X. And so luckily, we're a not-for-profit. So our ratio of success is 50-50. Like if we can sell 50% in revenue and raise 50%, that's considered a healthy. So it would be like, okay, well then that means next year we're raising this much. We got to now sell this many tickets and we got to raise that much more money. You know what I mean? And that was always the goal.
Yourself.
Yeah.
You corner yourself into doing it.
Yeah.
What's hard about that, although I completely agree with you, is like getting out of the cycle of, that pressure of overpromising and underdelivering. That's a lot of pressure. And oftentimes, the mantra is like underpromise and overdeliver. And how do you, again, like it sounds like, this pressure though is what allowed you, while other people were playing a scarcity game of how do we just get through these moments, you were operating from more of, again, there is abundance out there. There is more, that we have options if we corner ourselves and force ourselves to solve these problems. And look, cracking a few eggs to make an omelet's going to happen. There are going to be times where certain things fall short or whatever, or there's not quite, certain things aren't in place that you want them to be, or they're not quite there, but you don't let that stop you, and you don't let that stop and like, let's stop everything and sort of fix this one thing. No, we need to keep pushing forward and maybe move more incrementally on those things, but we need to build them first. We need to get them up and then incrementally start to, would you say that's like kind of...
Totally. And I'm the plan B girl, literally, because if you've got the goal in sight, you can't let that path and any kind of barricade that comes in that path stop you. You can't let that happen. So you just got to be like, okay, well, I see the pillar, and if this path isn't clear to the pillar, then I just got to go like that, or I got to go like that, or I got to go outside, go up the stairs, come down the balcony, and end up there at that pillar. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. And I'm always willing to be like A through Z scenarios, because it's like, how do we get there? How do we get there? Like when equity wouldn't allow us to produce in the pandemic, I was like, this can't be. So we had 38 people, and on March 10th in 2020.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way. On March 2nd, 2020, we had our gala. It was the first year that we raised over $1 million. We had broken $1 million. We were so excited. And 2 weeks to the day later, so that was March 16th, I had to stand on a hillside outside because we couldn't even stay inside, and fire and lay off 30 of 38 people. Shut down the show that was on stage, send the one that was in rehearsal home. I mean, I was bawling my eyes out, and devastating. And from that day, March, till January 2021, when we finally did produce on stage, I was like, how do we get live theater back on the stage? How do we do this? How do we do this?
Right.
And everyone else was like, we're just going to hang around and make masks and use all the PPP money to keep paying our people. I laid off everybody like on day one because I could see the future, right? And the future was we weren't going to be able to do the April show. We weren't going to be able to do the May show. And then we were going to have a big, long summer. And so if we weren't going to be able to do shows, I couldn't afford to keep all these people. So we had to let them go for now so that I could keep the business alive, so that I could get them back. It wasn't like ruthless, you're out of a job. It was like more like, let's keep everybody alive and well so that I can get you back. So that was the goal. Wow. And we knew that we couldn't do summer camp. Like Nora Center was closed down. We couldn't do the summer camps, but we knew we had already cast the summer camp for Addams Family. And so, and actually, I'm not sure I can't even remember if we had actually cast a different show, but we decided to change it to Addams Family because we had the set we were going to use for Lion in Winter, and we had it up and waiting in the theater in case the governor approved doing summer camps. And the day before we were supposed to start, the governor approved doing summer camps. So now we had, now no more than 9 kids in a room. Everybody's wearing masks and shields and everything else, but they performed and we had people in the house. How exciting. So now I'm like, we can have people in the house. We go back to work. We're back at the office by September of 2020, wearing masks, 6 feet apart, blah, blah, blah. And I'm calling equity like every day. I had Jeff Binder write a one-man show that you know very well called Higher.
I do, yep.
And I was like, dear equity, we want to do this. We had 7 cases in 100,000 at that point, and they were like, "That's too high." How high did it end up going? By the time we were done, it was like hundreds and hundreds of cases
exactly.
for 100,000. But in those days, 7 felt high, so they were like, "No," and so, but they said, "We'll let you rehearse." So we rehearsed it and we teched it, and we were ready to open, and they said, "You can't perform in front of people." Because it had jacked up to like 14 per 100,000 or something. And I was just like, you gotta be kidding me. So we called SAG and we arranged a contract and we filmed it. So we at least had it on film. And then I was still like, how do we get live performance on stage again? How do we get, and so I decided that, cabarets don't come under the auspices of equity. So I was like, we're going to do a 2-person version of Love Letters first. And we're going to call that a fundraiser. We're going to call that our gala.
Sure.
Therefore, we don't have to put it on an equity contract.
Right.
And then we'll do like 3 weeks of cabaret. And because we had figured it out, we had electric static sprayers. We had these machines we still have called the Synexus machines, which clean 99% of the viruses in the air. We had a deal with the hospital to get our people tested 3 times a week. We were on it in every way. We took out every other seat. We were like everything we can do to keep people safe, but equity kept saying no. So they got wind of the fact that we wanted to do Love Letters, and with 2 equity actors, and we were calling it a fundraiser and not going through them. And they were like, "How dare you not go through us?" And I was like, "Listen, I've been trying to talk to you guys for 8 months, and if half of that time they weren't even answering the phone."
Yep.
And so I was like, I'd be happy to do it under you if you would just give me a contract. And they were like, "All right, it's on its way." And I was like, "Oh, great." So we did love letters, and we did it with a married couple. The first week we rehearsed by Zoom, and the second week we rehearsed on stage, and we all stayed 20 feet away from them and did whatever we had to do, and everybody was safe. And then we did the 3 weeks of cabaret, and then because it had worked the first time, we did a Maytag Virgin, which was another 2-person play with a married couple, and we followed the same plan, and it worked again. And so we ended up doing theater for like 5,000 people between January and March of 2021, and we were one of only 17 theaters that were approved, but it was because I never freaking stopped. You know what I mean? I just kept saying, how will you let me do this? How will you let me do this? How will you let me do this?
Well, yeah, there's so many things to take from that. First off, it's like when you get an inch, you got to take a mile. That's sort of one you have to take because, and again, it's what's hard, right, is like, I feel like something that came up as you're talking to is so much of why I feel like so many theaters are hurting is because there's such a micro focus, right? Is let's stop focusing on the large term thing of making a theater, and then we'll get caught up in sort of the minutia of you name it. And there's so much, because we need to make sure that everybody's happy all the time. We need to make sure that nobody's, and I really am a belief of the man in the arena. I believe that, leaders, especially in the theater, get a lot of flack because X, Y. Now, look, as a union member, some of that I agree with. A lot of it I don't. But it's like at the end of the day, who's making the thing happen? And there's so much of this minutia focus on how do we make everybody happy? How do we make sure that nobody's going to be upset? And how do we make sure that people's feelings aren't hurt? And, I'm not saying that someone should be intentionally cruel, but also you can't let go of the big vision and the big goal, because if that's what's driving you, you're going to find a way to produce. You're going to find a way to make live theater happen, which you did. I mean, it's fascinating that macro focus, especially. I am curious about how you manage people, because especially as, how many people are on staff?
Now, 90.
That's insane.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so it's like, how do you, I guess, manage people? What are sort of your leadership principles around managing your team? And how do you ensure that you don't get too caught up in sort of the micromanaging or the minutia of sort of the necessary bureaucracy it takes to run a place like this?
Yeah, so that was a growth trajectory for me. I mean, over 20 years, because obviously the founder, and there was a time when if there wasn't a thing that happened, not a thing that happened if I didn't do it. And that included changing the toilet paper, or stopping rehearsal to sign a check, or changing the toilet paper, whatever I had to do.
Yeah.
So I think I said changing the toilet paper twice. I must have done that a lot.
Yeah.
So if it took they needed extra hands painting, I was painting. If it took whatever it took. So there was like the next phase, which was I'm hiring people. And then it was like this weird sensation of like they're doing my job, they're helping me do my job, because I still felt like it was all mine to do. And then we went to the next phase, which was we moved into a proper admin space. Like for a long time, we were in the little room at the end of the hall at the North Center. There were 9 of us in there. If any was on the phone, we were all on the phone because we were all listening. We were all we were like one little symbiotic school of fish. And then we moved into like proper offices where we were all in separate offices, and we had extensions. And I was like, oh my God, we have to learn how to write like inter-office memos. It was just so weird. And I remember that was 10 years in, and I remember thinking, oh, this is where I go from a scrappy theater maker to a real leader, and I think that I worked on that consciously, because I read a book around that time. We were coaching with an executive coach who gave us a book called The 3 Laws of Performance, and we talked a lot about founders and a lot about growth, and a lot of founders grew themselves out of their ability to lead. The business became bigger than them, and their small-mindedness about how it needed to work or how much they had to be involved put them out of their job. And I was always like, I don't want to put myself out of my job, because I want to be here to see what's going to happen, Right. So I sort of promised myself and worked hard on trying to make sure then that I like grew with the company, and that as the company grew, I grew. So now it's so funny because people still accuse me, my board members, even people who are close to it. I'm shocked really when they accuse me of not delegating, because I'm like, if I didn't delegate, how would all of this get done? I mean, there's no way, am I still like really focused on the goal? Like, was I just before I came down to you, like discovering a scratch, and I'm showing the facilities manager and I'm like, is this a scratch or is this dirt? Like, let's make sure that's cleaned up, and I'm on my way. But I left it in his hands and he's on to do it, So now I view myself as more like, for lack of a better phrase, inspirational leader meets stateswoman, like somewhere in there, because now there's a place in the community that I have to fill, right? I was walking down the street yesterday and people were like, thank you so much for what you're doing for our community. Like they were stopping me on the street, literally, and coming out of the theater. And I was just like, oh, that's so nice. But also I can't be everywhere all at once. So now it's about instilling values, instilling company culture, and hopefully inspiring people to like do their work well, and knowing kind of when to swoop in and really be on the scene and possibly fix it. But like this building, what I learned in construction is it doesn't matter how many layers you have of consultants, how many millions of dollars you're spending on people that you think should care more than you or as much as you, and they don't. Because if I wasn't walking around going this, like it would be half as what it is today,
Wow.
And so it requires that hands-on,
and that acceptance of the fact that like if it is your thing that and I don't think you would qualify this place as your thing.
No.
But as the founder, nobody's going to be as invested as you are, and so that's always the challenge of like trusting people to do their job, but also knowing that they're at the end of the day not going to care as much as you will, and that's a really that's a challenge to do. That's I never thought about it that way, but that is a challenging dichotomy to sort of hold in your head, and it's I'm sure led to some sleepless nights.
For sure, it's the most important thing is to get the right person, and if you find out they're not the right person, if they're not your guy or your girl, like you got to let them go. You just got to let them go.
Right.
And if they're great, then let them fly. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And let them really have their own purview and their own sense of empowerment and authority, and only swoop in when you need to swoop in.
Right, exactly. I want to talk about building the theater briefly because, I mean, this is, we're in a $72 million theater.
72-ish?
$72-ish million
theater. In this day and age, who gets away with coming in under budget?
But, it's an amazing feat. It's a astonishing theater. It's gorgeous, and it does. What I always am interested in is I come here and people here at 6:00.
Crazy,
in
right?
The lobby.
How exciting!
I mean, that's really cool. They're hanging out, having a drink, doing the thing. I mean, it's wild to me. My first question really is what has been the process of building this theater? And what was really important for you that this theater represented in the community?
So I guess, I put down this goal at the very beginning. Right. So I can't say that it was a gradual realization of because it wasn't. But I would say that something continued to grow because I knew right away that the naivete that I brought with me from New York was that there was going to be a theater on every corner. Like you can't maybe afford to produce in it, and you can't afford to run for very long, but you can rent a space at like literally anywhere in New York City. So coming from New York City, that was my naivete, that there's only a very narrow swath where people will really go, especially at nighttime, and that there are so many hundreds, thousands of people who just wouldn't come to the Norris Center, even the Norris Center, just because it was the Norris Center and it looked like and it was a community center and it had basketballs at the front desk and whatever. So I kind of knew right from the beginning that if we never built like the castle on the hill, there were so many people that weren't going to come. And my goal, if I was going to do it and invest my time and bother at all, my goal was to like really build something that would
destination.
Yeah, that would be of value to the community and a legacy. For for all the people that made it happen. And so I would say, though, that what became crystal clear to me on the trajectory was how impossible it was going to be to produce forever in the Norris Center. And so there was a time in 2012, so we were about 8 years old, when I said to the board for the first time, I can't do this forever. Like this is going to get real fast, to try to figure out the smallest play we can find and the most cost-effective play we can
All
find.
those limits, right?
That's still good, that we can build, build within the space and, make it work. If there's 2 locations, how do we even pull that off? And, all that kind of stuff. So I remember saying that to them in 2012. So in 2014, we started to get serious and we started to really look around for land in different places. We looked up and down Collier County and Lee County, and I started talking about it to the Bakers. And the Bakers had been around since 2009. They'd been supporters, and we're now kind of major donors to our annual site. And so I started talking about it a little bit when we would have lunch or when we would meet up or they'd come to a show. We're hoping to build a building. We're looking for land. And then we identified land here. Right. And so it was super clear to me, okay, now's the time to go. So 2015, and I asked them if they want to go to dinner. And Patty says yes. And then Patty got sick. And so I had to bring Jay Baker to dinner all by myself, which was terrifaining. Although he's the nicest guy.
Sweetest.
He's the sweetest. He's the sweetest.
I was teasing him. We were just, he's got a good sense of humor too. He's such a sweet guy.
But he's such a mogul, you know what I mean? He's the guy who took Kohl's public. I mean, that's a big deal. So I was just like, okay. But anyway, we had a delightful dinner. And then a couple weeks later, Patty and Jay came to see Vanya, Sonia, Masha, and Spike, which we were producing and I was directing, and I was there, like I said, as usual. And she came out at intermission and she handed me $1. And I said, would you like a bottle of water? And she said, no. And I said, what is this for? And she said, it's a down payment. And I said, for what? And she said, you'll see. And she went back into her seats. And so I still have that $1, by the way. And I took that $1 and I went to the board of directors, which was tiny at the time. And I said, Patty Baker just gave me $1. And you know what that means. We got to get going. And they were all like, wow, what do we do? Okay. And everybody sprang into action because Patty gave me this $1. So we started working on this land and we started working on whatever. And so created a meeting with Patty and Jay and one of our board members and our owner's rep, and we described what was happening over here. We showed them these like really preliminary plans. I mean, the budget then I think was $35 million plus $10 million to buy land and to do like a little bit of a transition fund to get us into the building in the first year. We thought it would take 3 years and blah, blah, blah. So that was like, crazy town because we would have been done by 2018. And it took so much longer to raise the money than we thought. So we told them all about it, and we asked if they would want to give us $10 million. And they were like, well, let's think about it. We're going to go outside. We'll step outside and we'll talk about it. And they went outside, and apparently we're talking about what to have for dinner and their drinks because they already knew they were going to say yes. They just wanted to make me sweat, and they did. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. So they came back in and they said yes, but it needs to be a matching grant. So now, you remember, I always stood on the balcony across the street and imagined that this land was where the theater was going to come out. We looked all over 2 counties and we couldn't find the right land until this land became available. And I was like, great. So not only did they say it needed to be a match, but they also agreed for us to be able to use $5 million to buy the land. So I'm on my way to the lawyer's office and I get a call from the lawyer and they say, pencils down. They've pulled the deal. And I was like, what? And they said they want to build a grocery store. They're not interested in you anymore. They don't want to go through with it. And I was like, what? And so we proceeded to continue to look for another year and a half because that was January 2016. And for another year and a half, we looked and still couldn't find the right land. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, I finally had 2 cursory locations that might have worked. But they were solid enough that it gave me confidence to be able to negotiate because they came back to me and they were like, all right, the land's available again. I don't know what happened. I really don't. To this day, I don't know how that happened. But I think it's because of the universe. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. So I was like, okay, great. We'll take it. And they said, but the price just went up. It's now $6 million instead of $5 million. And I was like, that'll never do. My donors, and I knew, part of me knew this was true. Like Patty and Jay would have gone berserk if I would have told them that the money went up, that the number went up. So I said, my donors will never go for this. And we've got 2 other options. And so thank you very much. Bye. And they were like, okay, never mind. We were kidding. $5 million. And so we got the land.
Wow.
And so then I had this really cool owner's rep who was not a great owner's rep, but he was a wonderful, he had been a city manager. He knew how cities thought.
Right.
And he said, why don't you take this. We bought 3 acres, 2 acres where this building is, and 1 acre across 12th Street where they're building that garage.
Yeah.
And our third strip went from the street to where the garage is. And he said, do 2 things. Go to the owners of the land next door, the Wynn family, and ask them if they'll do a land swap, which will give them the frontage along First Avenue, and you'll have the land behind. And then go to the city and tell them you want to give them your 3rd acre, and tell them you'll give it to them if they'll build a parking garage on it. And I was like, okay. And so we went to the Wynn family, who I didn't know at all, which, by the way, my married name is now Wynn.
Yeah, right.
So there's a story there,
right.
too.
Yeah, sure.
But we didn't know them at all at that point. And I was like, you want to swap some land? And they were like, sure, of course, because we were giving them more valuable land. So why would they say no?
Right.
And then that was great, because then it would take parking off the street, not just a parking lot on the street, because who wants to see that? And tuck it behind.
Right.
And whether or not the city said no or yes, at least even if we had to build a parking lot, it would be, hidden.
Right.
So I went to the city in 2017 and I was like, okay, we have these 3 acres. We want to give you 1 acre to build a parking garage on. And they were like, now why would we want to do that?
Right.
Because there was nothing here. It was like mechanics
Sure,
and tire warehouses
yeah,
and storage units. And I was like, let me tell you what happens when somebody builds a theater. Things come, and it's a magnet to growth, and future patrons will want to know they'll have somewhere to park, and that they'll build their businesses here, and that's what you want.
Right.
This was considered a CRA, like a community redevelopment area, because there was nothing much going on here.
Sure.
So they were invested in wanting businesses to move here.
Right.
And it took years, 4 years to convince them to take the land. But finally, the garage is being built.
And so the benefit of doing that, I just want to be clear, the benefit from the city perspective is because you were giving them the land to do, just with the Winds first, giving them that land, did that allow you guys to bring their business here? Because I know that they're setting up shops and stuff. So doing that, was that a way to entice them to come?
So eventually, for the Lewins, they had a catering business there that was in an old bunker that was like from the 70s or something, and so they were shutting down catering. I think that was separate from anything that had to do with us. So it was like good timing. They were shutting down the catering, and we were going to give them more valuable land, because the land on the street was more valuable than land that went, this way. So, and
the benefit for you guys in doing that was,
it didn't matter to us. If we had parking anywhere, it didn't matter if it was, but we'd rather not have it on the street.
Sure,
because there's all these architectural things that say, in a walkable situation, people will walk only so far without something visually exciting to see. And if they hit a spot, they'll turn around.
Yes.
And so with a parking lot on the street that was right next to our theater, there was a world in which people would come along and be like, oh, I'm stopping, and go back.
Exactly.
And so we were like, we want something exciting. And so then we started getting more into negotiations. Like, if you build this building, and they were going to build a 7,500 square foot restaurant, and we were like, you're going to have office space in that building? We'll rent it from you, because we were cutting the office space in here, because at nearly $1,000 square foot, office space didn't make any sense.
It was a mutually beneficial.
And here, so it was mutually beneficial. And now they're going to do 17 studio apartments in there for us.
Right,
so
exactly,
actors can stay right there. It's going to be amazing. So it was good for both of us. And then the city realized it was good for them, because you're not going to build a business in a place where you don't know if your people will ever be able to park and actually come and frequent your business. Right. So having more parking for everybody, and allows us to run valet there. Right. So anybody will valet park anybody, not just the patrons. So it was good for the city too.
Interesting. So it sounds like a big part of this was finding an area that was excuse me, actually needed to be developed. But then again, you're taking on more risk
in a reasonable location where people would actually come.
Exactly.
At night.
Exactly. That's really fascinating, because but like I say, you're going to take on more risk, because you have to sort of be a pioneer of the area, and also somehow figure out a way to entice other people to come, and also make sure it's beneficial for the city. So, but that sounds like now you have made yourself invaluable in the community, and has made the theater invaluable for the community in a lot of ways by sort of transforming this area and being sort of the first institution to do that.
Totally. And even though it took us longer, the Hurricane Ian and all of that took us longer because we had some damage. we were supposed to open in January. It doesn't matter. Like once the word went out that we had bought the land, that we had made the deal with the city, stuff started coming. So I show, in the PowerPoint that I do, the speech that I do for a lot of different groups, I'll show the swath of land, like 20 acres that was empty, nothing. And now you see AC Marriott's there. The Wynn Building's going to be there. The District across the street, the Warren Whiskey Kitchen, and even Grappino over on First Avenue North is all there because they heard there's a newspaper. When I saw the newspaper article that said, "Oh, we decided to locate here because Gulfshore Playhouse was coming," I was like, "Oh my God, that's so
wild."
Cool.
That's
and
wild.
so, but to your initial question about wanting to do this, why the building? Wednesday is the answer.
Wednesday.
On Wednesday, this past Wednesday. In all day, 9 to 4, Stephen Kalakos, our director of education, and I taught a corporate training in how to make a speech. While that was happening, you guys had a matinee in here. There was a matinee in there. And then right after that corporate training was done at 4 o'clock, I went to Grappino with our creative team for Every Brilliant Thing, had dinner, came back, did a pre-show discussion for Every Brilliant Thing in the boardroom, while a pre-show discussion for Anything Goes was going on in the classroom, while a whole bunch of little kids were singing Below Gabriel Below in Herzog Hall, and an understudy rehearsal was going on down here. And then I had to make the speech because it was an understudy was going on. And I was like, but it's the final preview of Every Brilliant Thing. And they said, you got to make a speech because you got to say it out loud. And I was like, okay. So I'm coming through Struthers Hall, and now I realize there's another group of kids now rehearsing for Wizard of Oz down here. And I come on the stage, I make the speech, and then I go watch the other show that's running in our second space. And I was like, this is what we did this for. Like this. That's exactly why I wanted to build the building, right? So that we could create that much opportunity for art and education in our community.
That's beautiful. And to centralize that and make it, again, a destination. I remember for those kids, I remember my community. Not that this is not a community theater, but I remember how important that building was.
Yeah.
And how much life was going on. And it's so essential. I mean, I could talk to you. I have 2 more questions because I could talk to you for a very long time. But the last question I have related to sort of this in your journey is what are your top fundraising? What's like your best fundraising advice? Because it's a skill set that needs to be cultivated. And, as I've fundraised, between me and my business partner, we've fundraised around $3 million for creative projects.
Congratulations. Well done.
Over a decade or so. And, we like to say fundraising is friend raising. It's so hard, and sort of as we talk about this victimization mindset and stuff like that, to be angry at people and to angry at people at money or da-da-da-da. And it's like, you need to invest in these relationships and treat these people not like piggy banks, but you need to build genuine friendships with them. And even though it may start with the intention of hopefully getting them to be a part of your team, like eventually a real friendship can grow. And that was sort of my tangent. And I don't know if that's your experience, but what is like sort of your top fundraising advice when it comes to cultivating donors, running a campaign, whatever it may be?
No doesn't mean no. No only means not now. That's been played out 100 times in my reality, like 1,000 times in my reality. Like literally people are like, no way. Like we'll never. Not only were there were a huge contingent of people who said to me, you'll never make it. I don't want to give money to you right now. I mean, no joke. Like, yeah, come back to me when you've proven you'll do it. And actually, to be fair, they totally put their money where their mouth was. And when we made it, they did give. But they were like, you're not going to make it. So there's the people that are the non-believers. Just remember, no one is a visionary. No one. Like literally, even when we were doing hard hat tours, when we were almost done 3 months away, people were like, well, they just couldn't still see what this was going to be when it was really filled with the soul of art. And so just always approach with passion, always. Because so few people speak passionately about anything anymore. So many people are just flatlined that you just got to go in and go have passion about it because people invest in people. Right. They'll be 100%. Giving you money, right? Not necessarily a project, but they're like, he's a great guy and he's so passionate about this. I want to help make this dream come true because believe it or not, as medicated as we can be and as sick, whatever the big pharma wants us to be, like we are, we still, like something in our souls flicker when someone shows passion and a dream. You know what I mean? People love it. Yes. And so we can give them that. And then we can be like, and help realize this. And then when you do, and you do realize it, they do give you the money and you are successful, shower them with accolades because they deserve it. Yes.
100% for whatever they become believers.
For being a believer, for being a visionary, and for helping along the way, because no matter how much it was your idea and your blood, sweat, and tears, you couldn't have done it without them, and that's 100%. The truth.
Right. I think that's wonderful. I mean, that's a great note to end on for me.
Great.
I do have the last thing we kind of do is we do this thing called comfort food performances. Okay. I mean, this was amazing. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm feeling very inspired at this moment. So, so we do this. So basically, comfort food performances is something silly that we do, but it's like a performance that we come to time and time again. That's one interpretation of it. So it's like if I Face Off with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. I watch that movie all the time. So it's like a comfort food whenever I come back. Or it could be something that had a really resounding effect on you long term, or it could be something that you've seen recently that you've enjoyed. I'll start just to give you sort of a sense of what it is. So I'll do two. Because I've been thinking about a lot doing this process. Luke Costello and Bud Abbott, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I used to watch that movie all the time when I was a little kid. And Luke Costello, I especially just, anything he does, I'm just in love. But him in that movie specifically, so funny. I want to watch that again. And then I'll actually pull one from this show, DeLovely. I'm always, because, we come on from the, whatchamacallit, the stateroom, that's what it's called. But so I always watch DeLovely from the wing, and I'm always like, Maya comes back and I'm always sobbing because it's so sweet. And they act it so well. Like their acting is just, and the choreography is just beautiful. So beautiful. No, not DeLovely. I'm so sorry, I messed it up. Not DeLovely. Easy to Love. That one. That's beautiful. The one. That just
when she does that spin.
And then she goes like that. When he's like grabbing her, she's like that. I mean. They're just, Josh Canfield and Sarah Etsy are just like incredible doing that.
Beautiful.
So that's something I return to and I continue to watch from the wing. So that's my comfort food performance. So it could be a movie, it could be a play, it could be whatever. What's yours? Not to put you on the spot.
Two things. If one wants to be a play, I'll tell you the play and the show. I was just talking about this yesterday. For me, and I keep talking about Jeff Binder, but that's why he's been around so long.
Right.
When we did My Fair Lady, I was talking to somebody the other day about what a transformer Jeff Binder is, and how I would just give him the role because I knew he would be able to do it, and then he would turn into that person, and I was just like, how'd you do that? Did you put makeup on your nose because your nose was always red playing that dude? And he'd be like, no, I didn't, but like somehow he turned into like a crazy arch red-nosed detective for that one. But for this one, it was Henry Higgins. Like I knew we couldn't do My Fair Lady and not have him be Henry Higgins, and yet still all the way I was always like, is he gonna be able to pull this off? And of course he was so beautiful that you remember the Norris Center, there was no like sound and light lock or anything, so every single night I would wait till the end of the show while he and peek and look through the crack in the door to watch him sing I've grown accustomed to her face, because it was so beautiful and well done, and I would sob just like you were saying, like I would just sob every time, and it was so beautiful, and it was just an amazing thing. The show is Outlander.
I've never watched it.
Outlander for me is every kind of comfort soul food, literally.
Yeah.
Like I will sometimes, like, in case you didn't notice, like the last few weeks were pretty stressful.
Well, of course.
Don't tell anybody this. This is just between you and me.
Yeah, sure.
I would put it on my phone on the dashboard, like literally driving home at 1:30 in the morning after tech, because I would just be like, I
just need to shut down.
I need some Outlander.
Yeah, sure.
Outlander, I discovered when I had to flee Naples in 2017 for Hurricane Irma. And I was just absolutely addicted to it. It's time travel. It's magic. It's the most beautiful love story. And I had a horrible first marriage. And so my first marriage was horrible. And I was single for a long time. And I think I was kind of like, I'm good. I don't need that again.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I'm not going to go back to that again. So like, unless there's some magic, handsome prince that shows up, I'm good.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that Outlander, which I watched completely all over again during the pandemic, I truly believe it like opened my heart to the idea that a love story was possible.
Yeah.
Like that it would be fun to have a partnership again.
Yeah, it would be fun. It'd be a fun and thing and not a bad thing.
A fun thing and not a bad thing. And so I go back to it all the time. Like I'm still like, I'm so excited because season 7B is about to start in like 2 days.
Wow.
And I'm there for it. So yeah, Outlander. Thank you for asking.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much. You really are I mean, I really mean this. I'm not trying to blow smoke. Like, you really are an inspiration to me, and I
so
reference
sweet
you
to
all
say
the
that.
time to people. I just because I artistically, but also obviously the fact that you represent what I think is needed in this moment, which is entrepreneurialism, which is leadership, which is an artistic spirit, and so I just really appreciate you taking the time for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.